All right, everybody. Welcome to Along the Watchtower. This is a podcast of mine where I, Ellen Walker, the host, give you my take, my commentary, my opinion, my feelings, my understanding, my perspective on, today's current events. Sometimes not even today. A lot of the time I end up overloading the itinerary and 40, 50 articles at a time. So we'll sometimes backdate, but it's a fun time. We hopefully get to take a look as far as I can tell, because I've gotten some feedback, and the reality is that you have to know your audience, right? If you're aiming to develop. Well, let me before I go down that. Today is Monday, March 1st, 2021. Good Lord. And I can't stand Mondays. But that's neither here nor there. The point I'm trying to get to is that when you're developing a channel, and you have a particular demographic and objective in mind. So you want to build a channel and you want to monetize it, and you want it to be based, you want your income from the channel to be based on views, not necessarily ads. So then you have to cater content to your audience, right? And I always tell people who are engaging in controversial conversations, we'll say, I always tell them, know your audience, right? And when I say that, I don't mean like pander. But you have to, when you have a dialogue with somebody, when you engage in a conversation, you have to, hopefully, right? And Chris Voss talks about this, FBI negotiator. He has a master class, The Art of Negotiation. And the reality is that it's part of a psychological dance that we do when we communicate with each other, right? By vocal inflection and tone and volume, we can determine if this person is a threat, if they're upset, if they're aggravated, if there's subtext that you're supposed to catch. You know what I mean? And that's how, for example, the sarcasm is a great indicator of a high apparent. Well, this is just stuff I've read, but it's a great sort of stimulator for neuronal connection, because it's complex. There has to be subtext, and for the subtext there has to be context, and you have to have, there's like these overlapping layers that come with like satire and irony and sarcasm. The darker humor, which I definitely favor, I lean towards, mainly because life is far too intersecting and ironic to not have an adoration for, that particular type of humor. But I digress, because the point is that you have to know your audience, and if that's your objective, you have to cater the channel to that, and that kind of boxes you in, right? You basically have to talk about stuff that people want to hear about, plain and simple. And your YouTube title and the content have to cater to that, and that's that. Now, if you're ad oriented, then you have to do, like, you can't curse. There's really only certain things you can talk about, because advertisers are going to stay away from controversial stuff. They're going to stay away from things that they believe might hit their price point, their pocketbook. And so if that's your route, you're even more stymied as far as the type of topics you can speak of and the way that you can talk. And I believe they really like it when your video is available to kids. Like when you're putting up a video, it says no, it's for kids, no, it's not for kids. And what it is, like, if it has any sort of explicit language or if the topic is explicit in any way, then it's automatically not for kids. And so advertisers really can appreciate when it's an ad friendly video, things like that. In my situation, I don't give a fuck about any of that. I don't care about any of that. I literally have come to a point in my life, and this kind of corresponds with what we're seeing, I feel like, not only across the country, but really across the planet, is this surge of not alternative information, but really this resurgence of the sort of, what's the term I'm looking for, the sort of testimonial journalism, right? The individual taking it upon themselves to deliver information along with commentary, understanding, of course, that they have no official press credentials. Is someone like in my case, or like, there's other channels, the lesser known ones, like Let's Be Frank, it's a conservative channel, right? Same thing. It's just a guy who talks about what's happening and then gives his opinion. The thing about it is that without channels like those, you would not have the larger channels, which literally start out in the same sense, where it's just somebody like Max Cedar. Well, here's the thing. I don't know how Sam Cedar's going to say Max Cedar. I don't know Sam Cedar's backstory. I know Jimmy Dore started out as a comedian, then went to the Young Turks, and then got booted off of the Young Turks for being Jimmy Dore. to kind of surmise that. But people like Mike Figueroa, right? Mike Figueroa, I think his name is, and people like freaking Kyle Selinsky. As far as I know, they're just individuals, intelligent, educated individuals who just started a YouTube channel to, again, express the news and then deliver their commentary, their opinion. And that is, they're huge channels now. The fact, I believe, always remains that you will have grifters, you will have profiteers, and then you will have like artists and journalists and expressionists, people who find the ability and the opportunity to convey their perception, their understanding of something for a number of reasons. Maybe they're narcissists. Maybe they think that their opinion actually matters. At the end of the day, opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one. But the will, the desire, the conviction to stand by your principles and express them in a coherent and intelligent manner, I think is a lost art and an important aspect of being a person. Right? Everyone's like, well, who cares what so-and-so thinks? Who cares what? And it's like, well, yes, to a degree, I suppose you have a point. Yeah, you can just kind of like Facebook, shut off your empathy, shut off your desire or understanding for anyone else. I don't think that's helpful in the long run because first off, everyone wants to be heard, right? And if you want to be heard, you got to do some listening first. But not only that, you miss the finer aspects of being a human, which is like you can incorporate and become whenever the hell you want to, whenever you want to. The choice is yours. And the fact remains is that, at least for me, when I consider not only some of the best moments in my life, right, which are generally with at least one other person, but some of the more constructive and prosperous aspects of who I am were bits of incorporation from other people. We learned from each other. So when we shut off those lines of communication, as I always say, what's left? Ostracization, right, or excommunication, incarceration, and elimination. So, for those listeners that do give me feedback, those viewers that do give me feedback, I really do appreciate your input. And I just hope that outside of my ramblings, that I encourage you to go off and have your own discourse and seek out your own engagements, and that really that's literally all I want. It's literally all I want, and whatever happens. And I'm just excited to keep moving forward in this, to keep growing, to keep progressing, and to keep doing better. That being said, please like, share, and subscribe if you like what I'm doing. If you like the objectives here, the goals, the end game, it all matters, and we all matter. And that's what I'll stand by. Sure. That being said, man, talk about back news. So I mean, we can cut to the chase for some of this stuff. There's gonna be some woke stuff. There's gonna be some riot stuff. There's gonna be some minimum wage stimulus update stuff. There's gonna be some CPAC hilarity. I was thinking about playing the video of the national anthem. It was totally butchered, but like I don't want to. I've already listened to it several times. I might still do that because it's really good. It's really funny. But so let me think here. All right, so I'll just cut to the no. We'll leave that. We'll just get to it. All right, so here we go. Republican senators to Tennessee's public colleges. Stop athletes from kneeling during the national anthem. Here's the thing. It is very American to look at something and say, I feel this way about it. And I want you to know that I feel this way about it. So, I mean, I think it's really more American, right? A more patriotic thing to do to show your disdain, your distress, your distrust, your distaste, your dislike, than it is to kind of capitulate to it. That's the irony about all of this. For starters, if they're just kneeling, like it's not like I understand. Wow, it's just like that's really a very chauvinist perspective to take. Like, oh my God, they're kneeling during the national anthem. They didn't put their right hand over their heart during the national anthem, during the Pledge of Allegiance. They didn't salute the president. It's like, oh, all right, I understand that there's decorum and there's etiquette, But can you chill the fuck out? Can you just calm down? It's like the Mr. Potato Head thing. Like, I get it. It's definitely Hasbro trying to stay ahead of the cancel curve. But, like, it's not that big a deal. They didn't even change the names of the potato heads. They just, instead of it being like Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head under the Mr. Potato Head line, it's Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head under the Potato Head line. Who cares? It's just them trying to keep their price point protected. Whatever. There are literally a million, like, woke things happening all over the place. And, like, some of it is like legitimate changes. Some of it is decent stuff. Like, it makes more sense to me. If you have multiple like, let's just make gender an issue for 10 seconds. If you have multiple genders of this toy, it doesn't make sense that they're under the Mr. toy line. Like, Mrs. is, it's like Pac-Man. Like, why would Miss Pac-Man be under the Pac-Man? Because she's Miss Pac-Man. There's Pac-Man is Miss Pac-Man. There's Potato Head is Mr. Potato. Like, this ain't, it's not it is symbolic rather than tangible, right? The effect. It is indicative of the sweeping changes. Oh, change. Oh my God. The sweeping changes that are happening to our society. The whole thing for me about change is to understand it, not to fucking fear it. Like, how does anyone grow in this society? We don't. We isolate ourselves into little bubbles, little echo chambers, with little sycophants all agreeing with each other. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And then as soon as we step out of that and see something else, hear something else, have something contrary to that, we have like this cognitive breakdown. Oh, Creator, help me. So anyway, so they're kneeling. And I think that is, you want to show your dislike. That's how you do it, especially, and that's the thing, it's something that matters. Like, if they did something that didn't matter, it wouldn't matter. So of course they're going to do something that's important to the people that they're trying to make a statement to. Okay? Now, here's the whole thing. People are like, well, you shouldn't politicize sports. I hear you. Yes. But this is one of those things where it doesn't affect the game actually happening, right? The game takes place. The end. So, see, that's the thing. Okay, so we can harken this to the entertainment industry and how the wokeness. The sort of social justice trends, the more, what's the word I'm looking for? Performative. There we go. So a lot of the performative social justice trends we're seeing, the virtue signaling, like, it is that at the same time, they're things, it is civil disobedience, essentially. It's what I've always advocated for on the show. It is a form of civil disobedience to have Black Lives Matter on your jersey. It is a form of civil disobedience to kneel during the national anthem. The game still goes on, right? And they get to show that there's an issue that they're taking with. There's a word I'm looking for. I'm searching for in my head. That's not coming to me, but that's irrelevant. And at the same time, everyone else who doesn't give a shit gets to get their game. At the end of the day, however, the publicity overshadows, I feel like, the objective. And that really is my only issue. It's like, all right, they're kneeling. It's we understand what they're kneeling for, kind of. Can you elaborate? Can you, like, put out a statement? Those are the sorts of things that I'm looking for. Like, okay, the kneeling is preceded by other actions. You can't just kneel. You got to do more than the kneeling. That's where I stand on it. I don't. You can't kneel during that thing. That's absurd. I think that's hilarious. But again, it's indicative of where people stand. And it's funny, the Republican Party is just collapsing. I've only been alive 33 years, but I've never seen the Republican Party in a more anti-populist position than they are right now. They all just stood up and literally declined. They all voted against, they all acted against the $15 minimum wage. Okay? Let me just go through this. So Republican senators, Tennessee public colleges stop athletes from kneeling during national anthem. Tennessee Republicans are up in arms over a state college basketball team's decision to kneel last week during the playing of the Star Spangled Banner, prompting legislators to warn the public university system to not allow students to do so again. A firestorm of controversy has surrounded the action by players on the men's East Tennessee State University basketball team, who during a February 16 game at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga dropped to one knee on the court as national anthem played. Coach Jason Stay and ETSU President Brian Nolan have said the team did not intend to disrespect the nation's flag or military, but are seeking to prompt discussions about racial inequality. Maybe they should just speak. After voicing their outrage in legislative meetings, local television news segments, and social media posts over the players' act of peaceful protest, Senate Republicans on Monday sent a letter to all presidents and chancellors of public Tennessee schools and colleges. To address this issue, we encourage each of you to adopt policies within your respective athletic departments. I was going to say, it's not like they can mandate it to prohibit any such actions moving forward. Signed by all 27 members of the Senate Republican caucus. The Republican senator stated the national anthem represents blah, 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 blah. When they don the jersey of a Tennessee university, they step out of their personal roles and into ambassadors, yada, yada, yada. All right. Lawmakers question free speech rights of student athletes. Now we're talking. Here we go. This is what I'm looking for. Similar discourse took place during a joint House and Senate Government Operations Committee meeting on Monday when legislators heard from a member of the University of Tennessee's General Counsel team. The First Amendment is sacrosanct, said Senator Janice Bolin, who does not believe university athletes should be allowed to kneel during the anthem. I would never resist anything that's going to allow them to exercise their First Amendment on their own time. Absolutely. What? They're representing the school, and the school represents Tennessee, and Tennessee shows preference to our time-honored people and institutions who went before us. We respect our heritage and our history. That's fair. That's fair-ish. Because the suggestion that students of a sports, because it's like, well, does that extend to them as students, right? Because if athletes of a school represent the school, do students of a school represent the school? And if so, does that mean that their free speech is curtailed as well? Because I see what they mean. That makes sense. For example, with businesses, right? Corporation stuff. There's certain etiquettes and certain behaviors that you cannot, like your behavior reflects upon your employer. So, if you do something stupid in a Best Buy shirt, it reflects poorly on Best Buy. Under that principle, I get that. But at the same time, like you would basically be in a situation where, yes, you have a First Amendment right. However, that right does not extend to you continuing to have employment if you were to exercise that right. You can always exercise your First Amendment right. That does not mean you will remain an employee. And that's where I would stand. It's like, well, athletes don't necessarily have their First Amendment right restricted, but as representatives of the sports team and of the school, there are limitations to how that expression can be exercised while they remain players on the team. So they can express it, but you just ain't gonna play on the. You know what I mean? Because I'm thinking, like, wait a minute, restricting athletes' First Amendment rights, that does it, like, no. And what it does, it restricts it by de facto. You can, it's like saying, you don't have to go home, but you got to get out of here. It's like you can express your First Amendment, but you won't be doing it on this team, which is sad and disturbing on multiple levels. It is highly, even them discussing it in this fashion is, again, we cover here the Orwellian present, which is a nightmare, and the encroaching function creep of why and how and under what reasons and circumstances one's First Amendment is restricted, one's Fourth Amendment, their right to private property, is restricted. The right to habeas corpus and having a speedy trial is restricted. And of course, in that case, if you're considered a terrorist in any way, shape, or form, even an alleged terrorist, you have your complete habeas corpus removed. You get detained indefinitely. Yada yada yada. We can thank the U.S. Patriot Act for that. And even as we speak, Speaker Pelosi wants to, sort of expand. I mean, it's not just Speaker Pelosi, really. It's a large swath of the Democratic Party that wants to extend the sort of anti-terrorism, domestic anti-terrorism guidelines and laws that we have now and expand them in light of, the insurrection that occurred. We understand, the sort of precedent that's trying to be set here. And again, that's not me dismissing what happened. However, the security theater is far too much, and the function creep is a scary, scary prospect. We know to the tune of almost $500 million, we have a literal military occupation in D.C. that's been going on indefinitely. This is going to be there indefinitely. unprecedented. But let us continue down the woke rabbit hole. This happened like a week ago, but Slate podcast host suspended over debate about racial slur. Slate has suspended Mike Pesca, host of the podcast The Gist, after he debated, not said, but debated whether non-black people should be allowed to quote certain racial slurs with colleagues in journalistic context. So he's not just saying should colleagues, non-black colleagues, be allowed to say the N-word amongst each other. This was within journalistic context, quoting someone else who had said it. Again, he didn't say it himself. He was fired for having the discussion, and this is what I'm talking about know your audience, right here. And this is a prime example of that. He was on his podcast having a conversation, a dialogue, a discourse about the validity of non-black people saying the N-word as a quote of someone else saying it in journalistic context. So two journalists are talking about someone else saying the N-word and whether or not that's okay on his podcast. He got fired for it. Know your audience. Why? And here's the thing. I would ask the question why he thought that his podcast was an appropriate place to have that discourse take place, but I already know the answer, because he was just trying to have a thought exercise. He was trying to have a philosophical, hypothetical conversation like any of us have on any given day, and forgot what his base was. Whoopsies. The New York Times reported that Pesca, who was white, was suspended indefinitely after getting into a debate on Slack regarding Times reporter Donald McNeil, who was recently suspended for repeatedly using a racial slur during a 2019 student trip. By the way, he was also quoting, this was like 10 years ago, and apparently he was quoting, because what it was, he was asked a question, and I've only heard this secondhand from Rising. I haven't really looked too much into it because there's multiple instances of this. It's not like the case of that teacher who was mocking the student, asking him for a pencil, and they parodied that on Boondocks, the TV show. This is a case of, okay, so the Times reporter Donald McNeil, yes, these people are being fired for having a conversation in a journalistic context about the N-word. The mere mention or talking about it and them not being black is getting them fired. So Donald McNeil for the New York Times, was asked apparently a question during a student trip, and then it was something like did he say it this way, or did he say the N-word like this? I guess the question was along the lines of, somebody just said the N-word to me, I don't know if they meant it offensively or not. And he's like, did he say it like this, or did he say it like this? He was fired. So now we move to Mike Pesca of this podcast, The Gist, who was talking about this guy, Donald McNeil, who was trying to quote and he gets fired. So this is fun. Don't talk about it, guys. Know your audience, guys. Know the people that you're surrounded by, guys. Know the people who are listening to you, guys. My God, you work for the New York Times. Well, then again, this happened like several years ago, but I digress. Pesca reportedly argued that there were contexts in which the slur could be used. Dan Check, Slate's chief executive, quickly stopped the discussion, the Time reports. While I can't get into specific allegations that are under investigation, I can confirm this was not a decision based around making an isolated, abstract argument in a Slack channel. Slate's spokeswoman, oh my God, and it was, okay, let me just, no. Slate's spokeswoman Katie Rayford told the Times. Rayford also confirmed that The Gist would be indefinitely suspended while an investigation is open. I'm sorry, he wasn't even on his podcast, good Lord. Rayford also confirmed that The Gist would be, according to the Times, Pesca said he was heartsick over hurting his colleagues while adding, I hate the idea of things that are beyond debate and things that cannot be said. Joel Anderson, who hosted a season of Slate's Slow Burn podcast and is black, shot back at insinuations that Pesca's suspension was an overreaction. For black employees, it is an extremely small ask to not hear that particular slur. Slur and not have debate about whether it's okay for white employees to use a particular slur. That's what I mean. Know your audience. The Times notes that Slate introduced a policy in 2019 that required podcast staff to discuss using racist terms before recording podcast episodes. Interesting. Pesca reportedly discussed the slur in 2019 episode about a black security guard who was fired for using the word. During the recording, he apparently said the slur while quoting the man, though a version in which he did not say the slur was ultimately used. there's no reason for you to use the slur. You can just say the N-word. That's the thing. It's like, is it necessary? Do you need the impact of saying the word? You don't. You're doing it for shock value. That's always ultimately what this comes down to. Because you can say the S word, the F word. Like if you can I don't even know why I'm explaining this. This doesn't need explanation. I feel like it should be obvious and evident, and yet it's not. To a lot of people, this is a legitimate discussion. And he's right. It's like it's not a small thing to ask in the and here's the thing. Poorly argue that they were contacts. Where did this take place? In a Slack channel? Is that what this happened? Because my whole thing about it is like, what just all right. We're just gonna keep going and keep going. Because here's the thing, I agree that there shouldn't be things that are off the table to discuss. But you weren't fired. Let me just make sure, because I don't believe from what I read, you weren't fired for discussing it. Were you fired for discussing? You were fired for using the word, right? No. No, you were fired for discussing the context in which it should be used. Yes. But here's the thing. Lack of ways. Because here's the thing. It says Pesca reportedly discussed the slur, blah, 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 blah. And he used the word then. They don't mention if he used the word this time around. Because that's my whole thing. It's like, bro, you can have a conversation about the validity of people who aren't black using the N-word, right? I'm black and I'm not even up here, Nick. Like, you don't need to. And that goes to show you, I guess, your ignorance. Like, there's a time and place for it. You can flip on the professionalism guy and have some etiquette there, some decency, and not just spew the word around like it's nothing. No, you need the shock value. You need it's journalistic integrity to quote the man authentically as he said it. I mean, I think when you say the N-word, people can replace again, I'm all about posterity, right? Getting everything 100% correct. But if a dude's cursing, there's a murder on the loose and you're describing his language and the things that he was saying, there's no reason for, if he says 15 F-bombs, to say 15 F-bombs. You understand? There's a way to do this, and I can't believe I'm actually breaking this down this much. But again, there are people who literally think like, no, he should be able to say the N-word in all its disgust in order for people to understand just how repulsive it is. No, pretty sure we get it. Fine and dandy. No need. There's never a need for black people on television to be on Slate, on podcasts, like, no, there's no, now listen, if it comes out, whatever. But you shouldn't be going out of your way to say let us say, like, that doesn't make sense to me, especially given half the time that it's happening. You have these journalists spewing the N-word multiple times. It's definitely unnecessary for them to do so. It's people like Don Lemon on CNN, when, God, all right, enough of this. Enough. A key disinformation hearing witness set to blast conservative news is a former Qatari government Al Jazeera employee. Now let's keep this in mind, everyone, okay? A witness for an upcoming congressional hearing on disinformation and extremism in the media is a former employee of Al Jazeera television, which for 12 years plus, it was basically up until the first 2 years of the Obama administration, was completely blacklisted from American media, looked at as this funnel, which it kind of was, this funnel and mouthpiece for terrorists, for Al-Qaeda, for the Taliban. And they kind of were. They were. What it is that they basically they take in any media. They take in any news, any scoop. They don't give shit. The dirtier, the better. They're grimy. But the point I'm trying to get to is that mainstream media, the Bush administration, all of America looked at Al Jazeera with disdain and distrust and distaste and disgust. And now, here we are 20 years later, and it's like nothing ever happened. And set to come to support the Orwellian function creep that we see, this all-encompassing, over-encroaching Big Brother society is Al Jazeera. The irony, I don't know, it is so bizarre and strange to see it's double speak, it's double think. War is peace, right? And it's like war is peace, and violence is tranquility, and it's just like I don't understand it. You're bringing in propagandists. You're bringing in a propagandist into a hearing about propaganda to speak on behalf of truthful information. No, that doesn't. That's not. Oh, and then I have to like take a breath and like, it's just like what are we supposed to do? The witness, Soledad O'Brien. Oh God, it's Soledad O'Brien. Soledad O'Brien. It's Soledad O'Brien from CNN. Yeah, it's Soledad O'Brien. Is set to testify on February 24th at the Fanning the Flames, Disinformation and Extremism in the Media hearing by the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. Her witness statement openly attacks conservatives news anchors such as Tucker Carlson. Really? And so we go through 4 years plus of Russiagate nonsense from Rachel Maddow, and she's crying and she's spewing literal lies that the New York Times and Washington Post then had to retract and almost got sued over. And MSNBC doesn't get sued. They don't get sued for misinformation. They spend $250-something million on the entirety of Russiagate. Okay, we find out literally that the entire Justice Department apparatus is, and listen, people are biased. Every administration has biased and administrators within them. But the text messages with Peter Strzok and his mistress talking about, we have a backup plan in case he wins and yada, all this stuff, and that unfolds. And then we have Christopher Steele in a dossier, and he used to work for MI6 and Fusion GPS. And then we find out the dossier is actually just a compilation of like tidbits that he was illegally surveilling him, hoping that these tidbits would turn out into something. They didn't turn out into anything. So he compiled it into one thing. That's where we get the Christopher Steele dossier from. Yada, yada, yada. We need to go down the rabbit hole. But all of that garbage. And there is actually an infographic by the Epic Times that you could just Google. They're going to ask you to, if you go to the Epic Times to try to get it, they're going to make you want to pay for it so you can hang it on your wall. Just fucking go to Google and print that shit out and save some money. But it's a huge infographic, literally, with dozens and dozens of people and multiple agencies and departments, and the interwoven, interconnected nature of what really amounts to a conspiracy. It is. And there are multiple conspiracies all over the place. All a conspiracy requires is more than two people to plan something. The point I'm trying to get to is, given all of that misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda, there's literally nothing concerning it or the effect that it has had on American discourse, on politics in this country. And that's because the person at the center of it is a man everyone hates. That is how deeply and terribly biased our politics are, and really this country is as a whole. We do not care. At the heart of it, most people in this country, and especially the majority of establishment politicians and of the judiciary body, don't care about due process. They do not care about equal and fair standards. Really, in this country, it's about getting away with what you can get away with and justifying or rationalizing it from start to finish. It is fucking abhorrent. O'Brien, however, has previously served as a correspondent for Al Jazeera, a propaganda spreading outlet funded and controlled by the government of Qatar. That's the Bush administration. They've been saying that shit since 2001. A 2013 press release reveals that the media company signed an agreement with Emmy Award-winning journalist Soledad O'Brien's production company, Starfish Media Group. O'Brien will contribute short-form segments as special correspondent to Al Jazeera's America's primetime current affairs magazine program, America Tonight, and Starfish will produce hour-long documentary specials. And guess what? They're saying the same thing that they're saying the same thing about Russia today that they were saying about Al Jazeera 20 years ago. Give 20 years, probably 10 years, given the cycle, the exponential growth of digital media, and you'll probably have RT up on a disinformation committee. Like, this is just, Oh man, and the cycle continues. The circle continues. It just keeps on going, and we'll just paint this terrible, terrible picture. That I mean, I don't need to. It speaks for itself. The overarching nature of our culture and our society. Well, okay. So the culture, society has multiple aspects. We have the technological aspect, we have the leisurely aspect, we have the ergonomic aspect, work. We have, the work, play, home, and like other aspects, institutionals, education, so on and so forth. So the cultural avenue, the cultural aspect, right, in terms of traditions and of not cultural norms, but of formative like patterns, memes, zeitgeists, the things that we as a society at this time are values and etiquettes, those things that make a culture a culture. Remember, cultures change and they develop and they incorporate things and things are forgotten and so on and so forth. So, as it stands, we're a bunch of fucking kids. We're children. We're a bunch of children. We're a bunch of adolescent, vehemently disdainful, self-victimizing children. And as technology allows us to disconnect and become less involved, less engaged, more apathetic, we will see this sort of inherent, inexcusable nature to not take responsibility for anything, to overreact and overextend because we don't have collectively. That isn't to say each and every individual, but collectively as a society, we're seeming to lose quicker and quicker the tools required to cope and deal with things. We cannot cope. We cannot deal with things. We cannot like function in terms of disagreeing, finding a sort of not a middle ground, but finding a compromising point that benefits everyone, and then going forward from there. We fail miserably. I'm checking my stocks right now, making sure everything's copacetic. We're failing miserably, and for some of us, people like me, it causes a regression. It's like, you know what? I'm going to recede into my corner here, because in my corner I don't have people irrationally yelling. Sometimes I do, but in my corner of the internet here, I can express myself, knowing that I have no intention of being harmful or disdainful. And in fact, I try very hard, listeners, listeners, watchers, I try very hard to not sort of filter my commentary, the information that I'm conveying. I try to not filter it through my bias. Everyone has an opinion, everyone has a bias, but the fact is that people, I hope, want to have like stimulated conversation and engagement. They just don't want to hear you like, oh yeah, this politician sucks, and then that's that. Like, what? All right, well, I mean, that's fine that you feel that way, but can you explain to me why? Maybe there's something that I don't know. Maybe there's something I don't understand. If everyone's just talking shit about the guy that they like or don't like, it's just more of this celebrity, superficial engagement. It's like people betting on their favorite teams. It's garbage. But back to the Orwellian present, our private messaging apps, the next misinformation hotspot. So now even the ability to communicate privately is being targeted as a pool for propaganda. I mean, what's the suggestion there? That all of our communication be monitored? Is that? It reminds me of the game stopped meeting, right? The War of the Short Sellers committee meeting that they had, the first of many, according to Maxine Waters. And Senator Representative Scott, I think it's Scott somebody, I forgot his last name, kindly black gentleman, he's talking to the CEO of Robinhood, Vlad Tenev, and he says to him, basically paraphrasing along the lines of, well, do you have anything in place to deal with the possible misinformation or disinformation that social media can give your retail investors? Like, dude, he runs an investment business. It is not his job to monitor what people are reading on social media. My creator. Let me read. It's obviously not, and I think this is an op-ed, it's obviously not great for public safety that neo-Nazis, far-right militias, and other dangerous groups are finding ways to communicate and organize. Oh, here we go. And that those ways increasingly involve end-to-end encryption. We've seen this happen for years, going all the way back to ISIS, and it's definitely make things harder for law enforcement agencies and counterterrorism officials. At the same time, there's a real benefit to getting these extremists off mainstream platforms where they can find new sympathizers and take advantage of the broadcast. What kind of hell is this? and take advantage of the broadcast mechanics of those platforms to spread their messages to millions of potential extremists. The way I've been thinking about this is in kind of an epidemiological model. If someone is sick and at risk of infecting others, you really want to get them out of the general population and into quarantine, even if it means putting them somewhere like a hospital where there are a lot of other sick people. It's a pretty bad metaphor, but you see what I mean. We know that when they're on big mainstream platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, extremists just don't talk among themselves. They recruit. They join totally unrelated groups and try to seed conspiracy theories there. In some ways, I'd rather have 1,000 hardened neo-Nazis doing bad stuff together on an encrypted chat app than have them infiltrating 1,000 different local dog spotting groups or whatever. Oh my God. When you open Facebook or Twitter, the first thing you see is your timeline, a general feed that includes posts by your friends, but you could also see posts from strangers if your friends reshared them or liked them. When you open Signal or Telegram, you see a list of the conversations you are having with individuals or groups of people. To get a message from someone you don't know, that person would need to know your phone number to reach out to you. So to complete our analogy, Facebook and Twitter are essentially billions of people packed into an enormous auditorium. Encrypted messaging apps like Signal and Telegram are like big buildings with millions of people, but each person is living inside a private room. People have to knock on one another's doors to send messages, so spreading misinformation would take more effort. In contrast, Facebook and Twitter, a piece of information can go viral in seconds because the people in the auditorium can hear what everyone else is shouting. Okay, because they're just like, it's just for a second there, just like, okay, yes, because there have been calls for Signal and Telegram and encrypted messaging apps to they've come under fire by all this sort of disinformation and reconciliation committees that have been going on. And for a second there, I was just like, where is this op-ed going? No, I don't read everything. So a lot of the time, I just see the thing and I'm like, okay, well, the headline is related for sure. Let's see what it's about. This is relating to a New York Times article right here. Are private messaging apps the next misinformation hotspot? I'm not reading that. But that it was an excerpt from that article. And so for me, right, obviously, the whole thing about it is there is no certificate, there's no litmus test of intelligence to be on the internet. You can just prop up a camera, bring on a YouTube channel, upload your video, and there it is. And if no one wants to see it, if no one wants to watch it, if people listen to 5 minutes of it and think it's ridiculous, they can simply turn it the fuck off. What this is another example of lowered expectations of people, of individuals. Even though I just got through saying that we're all that society for the most part as a whole as an organism is sort of like an adolescent child, immature and unwise, that does not mean that we obtain wisdom by having all information curated for us, certain things that may be controversial or upsetting taken away and shoved off into a corner or ripped out of the internet and availability altogether. Like, it is amazing to me the lack of support, the lack of conviction, the lack of approval, really the lack of what's the word I'm looking for? There is no like faith at all in the individual to be able to discern information on their own, figure out what makes sense, what doesn't, what is and isn't bullshit, and to go about their lives. It is very, very disappointing. It is and it's scary. It's scary because people are submitting to this. But Twitter, for example, and actually, I'm not entirely against this. I'm not. The word is confidence. Is this lack of? I don't know why that word was escaping me. So it's just this attitude of lowered expectation and complete lack of confidence in the ability for the individual reader, viewer, dissector of information to be able to disambiguate on their own and come to their own conclusions. They think we're all fucking idiotic children. They're not entirely wrong. It's complicated, okay? Twitter is now adding a controversial hacked materials warning label to tweets. Again, I'm not entirely against this. If you want to curtail the unfortunate likelihood of a hypothetically speaking weak-willed, weak-minded person. Sounds so pretentious. From digesting and regurgitating disinformation, misinformation, false information. That's the way to do it. Instead of removing the ability for an idiot to say dumb stuff that's not true, simply tack on. And they do this most of the time. So tack on is like, hey, this could be false. Here's the problem: is when it's done out of bad faith. Because I already hear conservatives, the conservative friends that I have, like, oh my God, but no, that's not true because they da. It's like, guy, a disclaimer is one thing, but the disclaimers are also being put on things in bad faith that in some cases, in a lot of cases that I've experienced, are true. They're just unfavorable. Snopes has done it. I forgot what that fact check is, but Snopes is really notorious for doing that. Where they will, because mainstream media doesn't do nuance and Snopes a fact checker. Nuance is what fact checking is supposed to be about. They will use the nuance in suggesting that the claim isn't true or is true, even though it is true or isn't true, by the nuance. I don't know if I hope that makes sense. It's wordplay. That's the idea of rhetoric. But these materials may have been obtained through hacking, reads the disclaimer affixed to a tweet linking to a story from independent news outlets, The Gray Zone. Yes, and so and this I will probably I don't know. We only got like 15 minutes left, but I forgot about this. So Reuters and BBC and Bellinger Cat participated in covert UK Foreign Office funded programs to weaken and destabilize Russia. So they were conducting their own foreign intelligence operation. Max Blumenthal, very, very, not, I don't want to say, yes, legitimate, but he's very thorough, Max Blumenthal. So I'll probably do this tomorrow. But the point is that the tweet is, this is what I'm talking about moderation out of bad faith. Instead of the information being verified, it's generally not, and Blumenthal's always been legitimate and thorough. So believe you me, when we get to this tomorrow, it will be legitimate and thorough. But instead of it being like, oh, well, this could be controversial or this could be possible, like it just immediately these materials are obtained through hacking. I'm not sure how they came to that conclusion, but let's continue reading. The tweet was originally posted on February 20th. However, 3 days later, users began to notice the label on the tweet. It is yet clear exactly when the label appeared. Furthermore, readers discovered that an extra step was added when trying to retweet the post linking to the story. A pop-up appeared reiterating the warning label and asking users to help keep Twitter a place for reliable info. Also, what does that say for future whistleblowers, right? Because we do realize that the entire situation with Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning is through hacking, right? They're accusing Julian Assange of hacking when in fact he's the publisher. And Chelsea Manning conducted the hacking, but this was legitimate information about the falsifying of casualty numbers and the whole thing. It was all the Iraq information, right? That we weren't getting, and just like with Snowden, information obtained through hacking exposed the pyramid overall operation. I know it's ironic that it's called pyramid, but that's what it is. But pyramid was an umbrella operation of multiple, I want to say there were like dozens, maybe hundreds of surveillance operations that were going on domestically. And all that information, all of that activity being hyper illegal, by the way, but all that information was obtained through hacking by Edward Snowden. So what does this say for whistleblowers going forward who want to expose the massive illegalities that are being committed by our government? Yeah. A link is included which forwards users to Twitter's distribution of hacked materials policy. I just whacked the mic there, sorry. The Gray Zone story sources recently hacked and leaked documents which allegedly show that the BBC and Reuters participated in a program created by the UK government to weaken Russia's state influence. This appears to be the first instance of Twitter using this particular warning label on an English language outlet. A search on the platform found one other instance of a version of the hacked materials warning label being used. This one was stamped on an Italian outlet's tweet regarding Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine in January. So they did hack to obtain these documents. The new warning label comes after Twitter's controversial decision to block links to a New York Post story in October 2020, which included material from a laptop belonging to Joe Biden's son. This was related to the Hunter Bright. I remember this. Yes, and then Hunter Biden ended up being subpoenaed, to which the Biden administration was like, oh, well, just because he's subpoenaed doesn't mean he did anything wrong. That's true, but it is interesting how they waited until after the story got blacklisted, after no one was able to talk about it, it was kind of a non-issue relative to what, like, the populace needed. The populace needed money, they needed health care, they needed $15 minimum wage. So really, at large, people didn't give a shit about the Hunter Biden story anyway, but the fact that the Democratic Party and Joe Biden's campaign tried so diligently to kill it and successfully did so with the assistance of mainstream media is a very telling thing. So, of course, right after he gets fucking elected, like everything else in this country that has happened, from the curtailing of the lockdowns to the subpoenaing of Hunter Biden, now that Biden is solidly in office and president, now we can go and start looking into certain things that we didn't want to look into before. Business as usual, man. Business as usual. This is interesting as well. Some Twitter users have pointed out that the New York Times story on Ted Cruz's trip to Cancun was based on leaked text messages, but that's leaked. That's not hacked. But they point out that there is no warning label placed on tweets linking to that story, even though it appears to fall under Twitter's own distribution of hacked materials policy. I haven't read their hacked materials policy, but that's literally like the antithesis, like of hacking. To give someone something, to leak something to somebody, is antithetical to having that information being hacked, right? The idea of a hack is a forced entry. So, come on, guys, you can do better than that. Because it's like there's definitely a case here to be made for double standards and censorship out of bad faith, but like that's kind of lame. So, Supreme Court, as we come on the bottom of the show and we talk more about the Orwellian nightmare, the Orwellian present that is a nightmare. The Supreme Court's debate whether misdemeanors can be a foot in the door for warrantless home search. We already have an issue with no-knock warrants. We have, I'm going to mess up her name, Breonna Taylor. There we go. For some reason I was thinking, anyway, it doesn't matter. But the casus belli for why no-knock warrants should be, gotten rid of is Breonna Taylor, who was wrongfully caught up in her ex-boyfriend's, who was a drug dealer's, no-knock warrant investigation, to which her house was raided, and her boyfriend at the time shot at the raiding cops, thinking that, who knows what the fuck. And then they literally kicked in the door, kicked in the door, shot through the house. He shot back, and they continued shooting. Was basically how that occurred. And but I digress. The point is we already have a litany of cases of no-knock warrants going horribly, horribly wrong. And here we are now with the Supreme Court, no less, determining if there should be further function creeping of really something that began in anti-terrorism laws, the no-knock warrant, I believe. But let's read here. Arthur Lang was 100 feet from his driveway when the California Highway Patrol officer behind him flipped on his flashing lights. Rather than stop, Lang turned toward his Sonoma County home, pulled into his garage and closed the door. What happened over the next few seconds prompted years of litigation and a case to be argued Wednesday at the Supreme Court with sweeping implications for police power. As Lang's garage door descended on that night in October 2016, Officer Aaron Weicker got out of his car and stuck his foot under it, triggering a sensor that sent it back up. "Did you not see me behind you?" the officer asked Lang, who said he had not. As Lang spoke, Weicker smelled alcohol in his breath. A test revealed Lang's blood alcohol content was 3 times the legal limit, and he was charged with a DUI. The question at the heart of the exchange, whether Weicker was on constitutionally shaky ground when he entered Lang's garage without a warrant. Yes. Yes, he was. He definitely was just talking about the dissection of our individual liberties. And here we go. This is a case of the Fourth Amendment. Police are generally required to have a warrant to enter someone's home under the Fourth Amendment's prohibition on unreasonable searches. Courts have allowed exceptions when an officer is in hot pursuit of a suspect believed to have committed a felony. In Lang's case, police could point only to his failure to stop, a misdemeanor. Though the difference may seem academic, civil liberty groups say the case could vastly expand police powers because of the breadth of misdemeanor charges. Misdemeanor crimes can be serious, and they also can include littering, jaywalking, and defacing dollar bills. Courts have reached different answers to the question at issue in the case. 5 state Supreme Courts have held a misdemeanor pursuit justifies a warrantless home entry, according to Lang's lawyers, and 3 state courts and 2 federal appeals courts said the issue must be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. The courts are all over the place on this, said Larry James, general counsel for the National Fraternal Order of Police, who filed a brief in the case supporting Weichert. The question is, should the U.S. Supreme Court lay down the law of the land? Well, oh my God. Fourth Amendment questions have divided the Supreme Court in unusual ways. Liberal Justice Stephen Breyer has joined conservatives when conservative Antonin Scalia was a member of the court, he sometimes sided with liberals. Last fall, Justice Neil Gorsuch called a ruling in Vermont allowing game wardens to peer inside a garage without a warrant an error. Gorsuch, appointed by President Donald Trump, was joined by Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, both appointed by Barack Obama. Lang's case comes at a moment of tension between police and communities of color after the death of George Floyd. Second-degree murder, man. So the incident like it prompted nationwide protests. Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay, and then they talk about Breonna Taylor and the no-knock warrant. Right. So, we're at this situation now where there is... I don't know if it's good that there is a discussion as to the integrity of a police officer being able to bust into your home unannounced and essentially go and like enforce however they see fit. And sure, there may be consequences for them retroactively, but in the time of exercising their no-knock warrant, they pretty much can do whatever they want, right? You're in a situation where since 2001, Americans can be surveilled anytime, anywhere, any place, placed on a list anytime that will disallow them from traveling anywhere, interstate or out of the country. They can have by civil asset forfeiture, because if you're suspected of any terrorist activity, your finances are automatically suspended, and then under civil asset forfeiture, they can take your stuff, take all your shit, and sell it, auction it off, and while they're doing that, of course, they can indefinitely detain you. These are all anti-terrorism laws that have been granted to them, except for civil asset forfeiture. That has existed since the 80s. But it's ticked up since, the anti-terrorism guidelines. Because like I just said, if you're suspected of terrorism, they freeze your money, okay, and they seize your property. Because if you're suspected of terrorism, you could be using those assets and that property to conduct your terrorist activities. And so here we are now, 20 years later, and instead of there being a curtailing or a sort of retardation of this expansive Orwellian Big Brother nightmare, we now, because of the insurrection, and I mean, I know there's going to be one way or the other, like, oh my God, see, and it's all conservatives' fault, and it's white supremacists that cause all this, so it's their fault, and that's why it's like, even if that's true, even if I were to agree with you, oh my God, it's the white supremacists and Trumps that did it, but like, that doesn't justify it still happening. That is an argument for causality. That is not an argument for justification. Okay, if we can agree that the Orwellian present, which is a nightmare, the Big Brother, all-encompassing, technologically surveilled society is a bad thing, the causality of it is kind of irrelevant. I mean, it's not that it doesn't hold merit, but what we need to do is to come back together post 9/11, pre and post Operation Iraqi Freedom, come together, the real liberals come together and go back to basics, which are us against the government. The class warfare has expanded since COVID. COVID was a prime opportunity for a tremendous transfer of wealth to occur, and for a universal restriction, I should say, of the basic functions of our society. We've seen a lot of strange things. People being arrested for swimming in a pool by themselves. People fighting over toilet paper. Like strange feral behaviors. This we're talking about at the top of the show. This regression of our this collective regression of maturity and of psychological fortitude. We are regressing into children. And as a result, you are having an encroachment of our basic amendments and our basic civil liberties, the likes of which we haven't seen before in our lifetime, basically. And it started with 9/11. 9/11 was traumatizing, is traumatizing, continues to traumatize, and has changed the world for the worse in an infinite amount of ways. I always talk to people about the pre and post 9/11 world. Well, now we have the pre and post COVID world. And yeah, it is mind-bending to say the least. Didn't really get too far today. Didn't get into any COVID news. I'm going to have to do much better. But just, some of the things we missed here. McDonald's abandons its fight for against $15 minimum wage only to be caught spying and conducting corporate espionage on employees that are seeking $15 minimum wage. This is why I was trying to explain to people about Joe Biden and the administration abandoning all hope and tenacity for $15 minimum wage. It's because it's theater. It's because the majority of the Democratic Party doesn't want it. And they knew if they didn't tack it onto budget reconciliation, which they could have done, it wasn't going to get through. They could have fired the Senate parliamentarian just like the Republicans did, but they didn't. And that's because they're breathing a sigh of relief that the parliamentarian did not support the fight for $15 minimum wage. And so it's gone, and it ain't coming. And if anyone thinks that they can get Republicans to sign onto it, they're fucking kidding themselves. The only reason you got a few plans out of Republicans for a $15 minimum wage that you did was to at least alleviate pressure from their base, because a lot of these Republicans, I don't know what they're doing. They're definitely anti-populist. Like their policies are not lining up with the polls and the statistics that are coming out of their constituencies. Like Manchin, West Virginia, broke his state in the union, still does not want blanket $1,400 checks. He should want $2,000 monthly checks. This state is the poorest state in the union. Okay, lowest GDP, lowest income per capita. Like it's absurd. But anyway, let's just keep going. We'll cover this stuff tomorrow. Survey: only 4% of Trump supporters view QAnon positively. This is what I'm talking about. These people come from all swaths of life, and unfortunately, they have rallied under Captain Orange because they're disenfranchised and they're disheartened and disillusioned. It is the same as when Barack Obama became president. The rally that he was able to get was solidified because he spoke to everyone. He spoke to the lack of consideration that was being had on the part of politicians in the establishment class. Let's see. NAACP sues Trump and Giuliani. Unbelievable. Useless. Let's see. New York Times retracts claim that Capitol Police officer was killed by fire hydrant. We'll definitely get to that. One of the many, many retractions that New York Times has done over the years. But I digress. And of course we'll have to talk about the Syrian strike. I told you that there was going to be an increased amount of aggression and engagement in the Middle East. I told you, and here we are. And he's unilaterally doing it too, just like every president before him. He's not fucking new. He's just like the rest of them. But I digress. Please like, share, and subscribe if you dig what I'm doing. I keep trying to get better every day. And please just be well to yourself and to each other. Take care.